Hello PSI2000 students. We're back for week 11, which is on political parties and their origins, or stated more simply, I suppose, we're talking about political ideologies and being able to learn some tools for interpreting those political ideologies. Political ideologies can be described, as I say in my notes, as a shared framework of mental models that groups of individuals possess that provide both an interpretation of the environment and a prescription as to how the environment should be structured. Political ideologies are held in common. That's why we identify them as ideologies. Typically, in the history of political science, we have described those in a fairly simplistic way as being right-wing or left-wing. But actually, there hasn't been very many models that have proposed a simpler or more accurate way to characterize political ideologies. Many studies have been completed to look at not only the policy prescriptions of these ideologies and how they differ and therefore define each other as different from the other, but also looking at psychological characteristics of the individuals that hold those ideologies and what the implications are of that for their positions with respect to a number of different important issues. So this week's readings are actually those that should feel fairly natural to most students, because we're often talking or read about political ideologies, the positions of conservative parties, liberal parties, the NDP, and so on. And we all have a natural sort of understanding of that various positions and how they differ. But few of us, unless you're doing political science, spend the time to look at what are the entire coherent package of ideologies and what are its psychological dimensions, not to mention its economic dimensions. Now, keeping in mind, however, that the right-left continuum, while it still holds true in most cases, it's not so easy to interpret everything according to that simple spectrum. For example, if we look at sort of current right-wing politics in the United States with Donald Trump or anybody like that, or even our own Conservative Party that was relatively right-wing in the last incarnation under Prime Minister Harper, there tended to be a very coherent base of right-wing thinking, but the interests that people or the origins of the views that led them to that position, that ideological position, could vary quite substantially. Excuse me. For example, that party's support base could easily be seen as having two quite distinct components. One is obviously the business class, the upper class, who support the Conservative Party because they support their views of small government, lower taxes, less of the nanny state, as they call it, and so on. But those people alone wouldn't be enough to mobilize a political base that would win an election. So a lot of the right-wing base actually came from the working class. And why would they be conservative? Why would they support that? Well, if the upper class supported the Conservative Party based on its economic policies, the lower class, working class people would be most interested in supporting that party because it's conservative from a social or a religious standpoint. So there was a common set of interests that the party was able to draw on, but from quite different sources. So when we use the right-left political spectrum, we need to realize that that is not in and of itself the entire story. You could lay over another sort of matrix on top of that said that, support this party because of its social or religious perspectives. So support that party because of my commercial or economic interests. So you need to nuance the left-right spectrum along that basis as well. So, for example, some political scientists identify the support of the working class for extreme right-wing parties as working class authoritarianism, they call it. They believe in the conservative social and cultural message of the conservative parties, not so much the They don't see their interests so much in the economic interests of the business people that would also support the same party. So they have different reasons for viewing the same spot in the ideological spectrum, the right-wing spectrum, as the valued place to be. So while the left-wing spectrum continues to hold true as being a very important factor in understanding political ideologies, it needs to be nuanced by some of these other considerations. And that speaks a lot to next week's discussion about how political parties pull together a base of support, how they send signals to these different groups of people that have different interests to aggregate them under one party umbrella. So you might have noticed, for example, during the Prime Minister Harper's period of governance, he would often send signals that spoke to business, on taxes, on free trade, on those kinds of things. That was to consolidate the base in the business class. But he would also send messages on religion, on birth control, on socially conservative messages that would, refugees, those kinds of things, militarism, those kinds of things that would be would cater more to a socially conservative working class base. And I'm not picking on the conservatives. The same is true for the liberals. I mean, the liberals do the same kind of messaging to try to consolidate their base. You might just use the same analysis to describe the liberals as maintaining a support of a more nationalistic commercial class, business class, and a more social libertarian middle class. And you can see the different messages. You could analyze the different messages of now Prime Minister Trudeau in the same way. So it's not a cynical effort to associate with any one party. It's just a reality that, for example, we have the Liberals on more of the middle of the political spectrum, but hanging on to part of the business class through the messages, certain kinds of messages they send on infrastructure investments and those kind of domestic capital kind of messages. And on the other hand, they have things like support for refugees, legalization of marijuana, separation of state and church, those kind of messages to the middle class, which tends to have more social libertarian viewpoints. So you can use the left-right perspective to really understand political parties, but it often has to be nuanced by the types of messages and how political parties are consolidating their base in this way. So when you're reading this week's readings, think about that. How are these political parties constructing their electoral base of support by appealing to different people who occupy the same kind of same general area of the left-right political spectrum, but for different reasons? And when you use the left-right political spectrum like that, even though it's very simple, it's actually very effective. And so think through when you're reading this week, think through our own political parties from that standpoint. And we'll see you again next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.